All right, guys.
You should get an
We
East Coast thing going with Ken, and then we could like have different like hubs.
Yeah,
we should. That'd be awesome.
that would be awesome.
Let's get started with the kind of overall perspective on fantasy baseball for 2024. We don't have to get too much in depth, but I am interested at first glance. What do you guys think, or what stands out to you in terms of the fantasy baseball landscape for 2024? Matt, why don't you get us started?
I'm always starting, man.
Because you're at the top of my
My,
my Zoom.
my landscape is pretty effed up because usually this time of year, I said this on the other pod, I'm looking at fantasy baseball and NFL mock drafts. Now I at least have a football team in the playoffs, so it's kind of weird moment for me where there actually is overlap, where I have something that could at least carry me over till next week, and then we have international signings, right? And then we have catchers report. So there's like going to be no break, which is awesome. Um, I think the landscape is it's quite interesting. I think we're in a transitional period. We have been for a couple years. I think if you look I went back and looked at our original draft 7 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, I think the younger players that were drafted in our very first league keeper draft, a lot of them are stars now, at least the ones drafted earlier. If you go through the top 25 players in Dynasty, and if you just use a list from Forecaster or from Baseball Prospectus, those 25, I think 20 of them were rostered in our league before they actually played an MLB game.
Oh wow.
5 of them were drafted, yet were always rostered. So they would have to be acquired through trade. So I think there is kind of that carryover, and I mean that transition, I should say. I can't take much credit for it because I caught on a little later, but there were other people who drafted Vlad Guerrero or Aaron drafted Soto. Tino drafted Acuna and Tatis. So it's just fun to kind of look back and see how things have evolved.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know what? When that draft was going on, I was not a prospect guy at all. Still not really. But I thought something was broken. Like I didn't know what was going on. I would go, I don't know who these guys are, and I really didn't. And it was, I had come from a keeper league before, but certainly not with the emphasis on the prospect. So yeah, I've come around. I think that's kind of my take too on the fantasy landscape is that everyone is kind of prospect crazy now. I think with the rules change where they're trying to promote that in Major League Baseball, to incentivize people to put rookies out there. But yeah, when that draft was happening, 6 years ago, I thought like when like an Acuna was taken or Julio Rodriguez, I just went, oh, it's a pass on that. I get to take Nelson Cruz
Right.
now, which I did in the fourth round.
Right. So what I have to answer the question, I can't, and this is both our league and kind of, I think, what's out there from a content perspective. I can't get a hold of what managers actually value. I think that stolen bases, the dynamic, like the stolen base dynamic has changed so much because of the rule changes that I don't know that there's really consensus on what steals mean.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting to me. I think we're in a period of transition, to borrow Matt's phrase, with regards to steals. I think we vacillate with pitching because, sometimes it's, well, pitchers get hurt. And then other times it's, if you don't have 7 starters who are starting regularly, you can't win, at least in our league. That's interesting. I played in a roto league a few years ago with Brandon where he just was pure ratios and destroyed everyone with ratios. I don't know if that approach works anymore. So it's just interesting. I can't get a hold of what people are actually thinking, which is kind of cool, right? It forces you to make your own decisions about what you believe to do with your own roster. And then finally, the big thing, and this might just be me getting older, but plate appearances matter, right?
Yeah.
And people would always say that. And I'd say, yeah, but what about this platoon guy over here? And at this point in time, I realize plate appearances are king, right? You can't, I look at my own team and I don't love Freddie Freeman or Marcus Simeon, right? I don't love them as players. I think they're both very good players. I don't love watching them, but every time I think about dealing one or putting them on the block, I see the 700 freaking plate appearances, right? And it's really hard to trade that because what are you replacing that with? And so plate appearances to me matter. They matter at catcher. They matter everywhere. And as much as I'd love to play some of the platoon guys that I love so much, they're not even a Jock Peterson, who I think puts up good stats. It's still 400 plate appearances. So I think that to me is a big thing. But I can't really get a hold, at least as of yet, as to what people are thinking.
And on that, our categories are pretty radical, right? We only have 3 ratio categories out of the 14.
Right.
We have the OPS, ERA, and WHIP. So yeah, counting stats, appearances, plate appearances, that's something I've overlooked in the past.
Yeah. And I'll say this is that, Tino, when you say plate appearances is king, my take on this that I've kind of like learned right now and is my new strategy on this is that even though there's we have errors in our league, but I have never considered defense before. And now the way I'm looking at it is good defense equals plate appearances. So I've been, I kind of learned that the hard way with Von Grissom, where he didn't have the defense. And so he didn't get the plate appearances. And so now when I'm looking at, a rookie, that if he's got a weak arm, which apparently Volpe does, but I learned that a little bit too late. But he did win a Gold Glove. I think that's some kind of an award for defense, but maybe. And but anyway, yeah, defense is now something that's kind of enters into my equation because they will eventually equal to plate appearances.
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, you want to give a quick overview of the 24 landscape?
Kind of what we were talking about a couple of times right now is that I just feel that when we started our league, the initial draft on in our league, where some people were drafting minor leaguers and other people were drafting Nelson Cruz, that I think that right now everyone has kind of come around to that idea of rookies being exciting and having that, being able to open up a new present. And, I was reading something on some site the other day, and they were using Corbin Carroll as a verb, right? They were saying like, when prospects don't Corbin Carroll, then they get discarded. Right. And, and that must have been like a big happy moment for Matt last year when you're the guy that's invested in Corbin Carroll for the past 2 years and just sat on him. And then as soon as he gets a chance, even though he was batting 7th most of the year, that he just got to explode like that. I think everyone wants to have that experience in fantasy baseball.
Absolutely. How about you, Aaron?
I think from the hitting side, the impact of the stolen base increase, which is about 40% across the board, as well as an increase in success rate. Looking at our league as an example, that's the lens that we look up through this all primarily. I was 7th both years in 2022 and 23, but in 22 I had 78 steals, and then in this past year I had 129. And 129 steals last year for my roster would have put me in 3rd the prior year before. And so, and then the other thing that was interesting to me looking at our league specifically on this is the same 5 teams were in the top 5 both years. So I think there's something to be said for, yes, there was more steals, but there was really no churn at the top. So the teams that have the speed, they just ran more. And, I increased my team speed, you could say that, but against the field, I didn't. And so, and I think with our league being an OPS league, going after speed, sometimes you have to compromise other things if you're trying to focus on the category, but it's only one category, right? But I think it's a dynamic that also could affect pitching, and I think you might see some adjustments coming back the other direction in terms of how teams strategize against speed, that we might see this year. So I think that's something on the hitting side that is a focus, is an area of interest for me. And I think on the pitching side, usage, both in pitchers, I mean, we just don't have that many guys. I mean, this has been said, but we don't have really 200 inning guys anymore. Those guys are unicorns. And then the effect that has on wins which is one of our categories. And then I think the correlation between high stuff and injuries, is something that's really prevalent. We have so many guys this year coming back from Tommy John, from older guys like DeGrom all the way through young guys like Shane Baz and Walker Buehler. I mean, and it's just become a thing. Like, when is this guy gonna get hurt? So it makes our game particularly challenging because there's a level of attrition to it. I think from a roster construction standpoint, you can, try to be measured. And I think there's a certain area of value in guys like Logan Webb and Max Fried, these guys that aren't necessarily exciting stuff, velocity pitchers, but get outs, get innings, accumulate. It's making me look at those guys differently in fantasy, because I think there is a value to having not necessarily 7 of those guys, but with the volatility, with the attrition that we know we're going to see, like, who's it going to hit this year? Who's it going to land on? I think that I value those guys differently entering this year. It's been a trend, and I think that will continue.
I think you're right, Aaron. And what's interesting to me is identifying those pitchers who, I think mechanics matter, right? And mechanics matter, and maintaining velocity matters, right? Things that signify health. And it's something that I personally have tried to do for a number of years, is find those pitchers who I can count on, right? And organizations that aren't going to just trash their pitcher and then bring in the next one. And I think we know which organizations those are, and trying to not avoid those pitchers, but use that as a portion of our evaluation, right? That's a variable, or that's a characteristic that I have to grade, is they come from X organization, and because they do, I have to take their innings with a grain of salt. Whereas there are other organizations where you're like, you know what? I'm looking at a George Kirby, and I might be jinxing myself right now, knock on wood, but I see a repeatable delivery, a guy who knows what he's doing, mechanics that remain the same. And I think he's going to get those 190 innings. And I think the Mariners organization as a whole really values the ability of a pitcher to go 6-7 innings at a time, right? And to have clean mechanics, and to not tax that shoulder or overtax that elbow. So I think you're right. I think it's something that most of us have been taking into consideration, at least a bit. And I'd like to comment on the steals thing too. So let me ask you the question. So for the most part, you feel like what I heard you say is all boats kind of rose because of the new rules. And so we saw the rankings of our teams remain the same, despite the fact that steals increased.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It
So
was
there really wasn't churn in terms of finishing. Like, we all had more steals,
right?
But in terms of who had the most speed and who performed the best, we didn't see churn.
Right.
And so if you're looking to improve in that area, if those players already reside on other rosters, how do you approach that? Or how do you look at those rosters and think, to some of you guys' prior points on this topic, how do I think ahead 2 or 3 years ahead?
Right. I think just one other thought. When you said that, I thought about Saris, and how he, at least a couple years ago, would kind of, pound the table for players who had the ability to have, to steal bags and hit home runs, right? And that was something that he would talk about, is that, and you and I, Aaron, talked about this a lot on Baseball and Coffee, about the idea of having a roster of players who could do both, and how important that
Right.
is to have a roster full of players who can do both. And I think to
Right.
me, the idea of sacrificing OPS and RBIs for a player who can steal 80 bags just doesn't fly with me. I can't do it. Right. I don't have the appetite for it. And I think we're in an age where there's enough power speed combo guys out there that if we can identify them early on in their careers, be it in the minors or earlier in the majors, they're hugely valuable. It's why I was hesitant to give up Volpe, right? Because despite the fact that Volpe couldn't hit a slider last year, he still was 2020. And that to me was worth a lot. You guys have any thoughts on that? Do we want to move on? We're good? Cool. Let's get started with catcher. So we're going to do an overrated, an underrated, a favorite player at the position. I think we should try, for the sake of time, to move through it semi-quickly, unless we land on a player that we really want to talk about. Matt, why don't you get us started with catcher?
Okay, catcher for overrated. I have Will Smith. He is ADP in a lot of dynasty leagues at about 66. What I do love a lot of what Will Smith does, but for me it's not so much of what he can do, but opportunity. He really has not gone over 140 games as a catcher. With the Dodgers lineup being loaded, I don't see him DHing too much. What I think he was in the 130s in games last year. I don't see him eclipsing that. If I want to get a catcher in the top 100, I want 140 plus games from that catcher. So I would not draft Will Smith at 66. Are we just going down our list here for all three at the same time?
I would like. I want to push back on Will Smith for a minute, though. Roster Resource has him hitting fourth in that lineup, right? And so you're telling me that overrated is the guy who's hitting behind Betts, Ohtani, and Freeman?
Yeah, but I really like.
I'm telling you that because I'm going by ADP. I'm not gonna. 66 is what the fifth round. I'm not going to pay a fifth round price for him in setting up a dynasty team where he's not going to give me those at bats.
Yeah, no, that's it. I never thought about that. That with Ohtani at DH, I mean, Ohtani is at DH. Will Smith gets his at bats by going back and forth on that, and that's completely gone away. So I mean, I love Will Smith, but that's a really good point.
If his ADP was lower, I'd be all for it. I think he's a great player, but I just don't like the ADP in dynasty leagues there. We're just going down the list of the all three.
Yeah. Why don't you give your three?
So, at ADP 214 is Bo Naylor. He's my underrated. I can see him moving up in that lineup. I actually would wager with Aaron here. I think Naylor's going to have put up stats comparable to his brother this coming year. So Naylor's at ADP 214. I could see him playing a lot. He's the everyday catcher. I know Cleveland does funky things with catchers, but I like his swing a lot. I watched him a lot last year too. He's kind of one of those players that maybe you have the counting stats there, but when your pitcher is pitching against him, you're kind of like, oh shit. Naylor's up and there's runners on first and second. So he has that it that I like in catchers. So 214 I think is definitely worth it in a keeper league to invest. If there's like a breakout young catcher, I think it would be Naylor. And then my favorite would go to Harry Ford, ADP 350. I like the idea of kind of a Russell Martin type of catcher that's going to come up and steal a lot of bases. I do like that speed thing. I think his speed is still underrated. His 40 numbers are great. He's one of those players that I'm excited to see how Savant is going to measure him when he comes up as far as his sprint speed, because he appears a lot faster than even how scouts, how grading him. He's usually at 55, 60, I think is on average. I think he's 65. But anyway, I'm biased. I'm a Mariners fan. I watched him a lot last year in Everett. I think he could be kind of that this is my catcher and he's a lot different than everybody else's catcher.
Like
And I just love watching him. The other thing that I mentioned on the Monos pod, I think he had 16 home runs last year. 7 of his home runs were in the 8th and 9th inning. He just has that I'm going to turn it on when I can and when I want to, and he has kind of that clutch feel. He performed well in the WBC as well because of that.
awesome. My overrated is Keibert Ruiz, Washington Nationals catcher. You see the 18 home runs and you think, cool, 18 home runs from my catcher. But 55 runs and 67 RBIs last season in 562 plate appearances. I think part of that speaks to Ruiz. Part of that speaks to the Nationals just having a bad offense. 717 OPS doesn't speak to the 18 home runs either. And then for me, 5.5% walk rate leaves something to be desired. And I tend to try to stay away from the really high zone contact hitters, because I think they tend to make contact on pitches they may not. They make contact with everything, right? Which causes them to make weak contact more often than they might want to. So Ruiz is my overrated. I just think organizationally, it doesn't fit him. OPS lags because of the number of outs that he hits, and he doesn't walk. And I think he's going to be overdrafted because those 18 home runs look good. Underrated is Yainer Diaz. That's one of my regrets from last year is that I did not keep him. I don't remember if I drafted him or picked him up early, but I didn't have him for most of the season. 23 homers and 376 plate appearances is pretty crazy. 848 OPS. The thing I don't like about him is the 2.9% walk rate and the almost 15% swinging strike rate, but 86.8% zone contact, a ton of right-handed power in Houston, and the type of catcher who is not going to play catcher much, meaning if he really hits, you're looking at 500 plate appearances, right? Which we already talked about can be huge. And then my favorite catcher, put your seatbelt on. Favorite catcher is Bo Naylor. I wish I had him. I don't know that I would keep him if I had him, but that's not a slight on Bo Naylor. I just think when you talk about wanting to keep a catcher, or we talked about on the Monos pod or last pod about the value of minor league catchers as an example, Harry Ford was the one who could really separate himself from other catchers, right? And then Ethan Salas potentially. And Naylor has that. We're forgetting Naylor has speed as well. He could add 10, 12 steals, but a 50% fly ball rate is freaking nuts. And of course, the limited time, 226 plate appearances, but 50% fly ball and 13% walk rate, to give me that at like any other position as well, let alone catcher. So a catcher with a little bit of speed, I'd say 55 to 60 power. So you're looking at, with time, probably 18 to 20 home runs, and that kind of fly ball rate and that kind of walk rate. I could see him hitting third or fourth in that lineup if he plays up to his potential, which then you're talking about a top probably 3 catcher in fantasy baseball. So I love Bo Naylor. I like the brothers' stories. I think it's awesome, not because he's African American, but because he has other brothers playing in baseball. But love Bo Naylor.
Canadian thing too.
What's that?
The Canadian thing as well.
Right. So Andy's got a brother who's a prospect for the Athletics, which is crazy. But yeah, Bo Naylor is my favorite catcher as of right now.
And you heard it first on this pod, right? He's going to be the William Contreras of 24.
Nice. Doug, you're up.
All right. So with this whole thing, I started off looking at overrated, underrated by looking at ADP on this, and I started with catcher. And so when I went to look at the ADP for catcher, I just went to who's the top rated ADP catcher, and it was Adley on the Orioles, and it's right now what I looked at was it was an ADP of 49, and I would love to have Adley on my team if he just showed up on my team, or if someone wanted to trade him to me or give it to me, but if you were doing a draft and you were drafting a catcher at 49, I just look at that as like, this is the definition of overrated. You should find something else. I mean, it's kind of like they're all in a piece. They all have kind of like, they're all around the same. There's no breakout catcher. on this, when I did look up the kind of what he did last year, I saw that he DH'd quite a bit, which is great. I love that. But yeah, 49 for a catcher is just if you had to pay that price, that's just crazy. And that just kind of goes against my fundamentals on catchers. I don't like them.
I'm gonna accuse you of catcherism.
What's that?
Catcherism. I'm gonna accuse you of catcherism.
Catchers are well. If I had like a saying, it would be never keep a catcher, never keep one. So Tino, I don't think you made a mistake last year on that. You shouldn't keep them anyway. Just let them go, and they'll come back. If they love you, they'll come back.
Set them free.
Set them free, baby. I'll go with my underrated pick is Jonah Heim. I drafted him last year, and then a couple of weeks down in the season last year, someone dropped Sean Murphy, and I just went, oh well, I want Sean Murphy. Sean Murphy's gonna have like a high waiver wire pick, and so I dropped Heim for Murphy, thinking that it was like the steal of the year. But like all catchers, they all break down, they all get hurt, and they all get injured. And looking back on it today, Heim actually had a better season than Sean Murphy overall. I should have just let Sean Murphy go to the next guy last year, just because catchers are just heartbreakers, right? They'll break your heart on this whole thing. So anyway, that's my guy, and actually that's my fear. I'm gonna try to draft him again, but I'm not gonna spend too high of a draft pick for him. But I think Jonah Heim is some guy. He got injured last year too. Obviously he's going to get injured this year, but hopefully not too bad. But that's my guy going for this year. But again, catchers, it's I think that every other position will be more interesting than this one going forward.
Who's your favorite catcher? Do you have one?
My favorite?
Yeah.
I mean, Will Smith is awesome, man. But when Matt just pointed out that he doesn't have a DH spot anymore, I realized that I'm not going to see him too much. I think that Roberts isn't going to play him too much. He wants to probably keep him at that same level of catching because it's worked for him without getting injured. And so he's just going to be sitting on the bench in exchange for Ohtani for all that time. So a lot fewer counting stats, but still, he's a great guy. I love the fact that he's able to take his hands in on an inside pitch and muscle that into the outfield. He's a great player. I enjoy him.
Maybe they bring up rushing and Will Smith gets even fewer at bats. We'll see.
Yeah, or Will Smith plays left field. Who knows?
That's Teoscar Hernandez. That's for another pod. Aaron.
Yeah, so I feel really unoriginal. Will Smith was my overrated. I think I love Will Smith as a batter. His approach, but I think it comes down to opportunity and his plate appearances. I mean, it's already been outlined, so I don't really have anything else to add. But it's not really about his plate skills or anything like that. It's just I think his opportunity is evolving, and the Dodgers are going to be a winning team, and they're going to want to keep Will Smith healthy and for the long haul. I think my underrated player for me is Gabriel Moreno for a lot of the same reasons. We talked earlier about how defense equals plate appearances. He's an excellent defender. He's 23 years old. And I look at, his first full season, he was splitting time early on. He sees more of the role as the more year went on, was their primary catcher in the playoffs. But I think, his sub 8% swinging strike rate, sub 20% K rate, his launch angle is 4.2 degrees, but we know that guys can fix that. So I love the quality of contact that he makes. I love his plate decisions. I think his role is increasing. And I think he's going to be a key part of that lineup going forward. And I would buy him on the upswing at 23 years old. And my favorite catcher is Bo Naylor.
Ooh,
nice.
We got 3 Bo Naylor mentions. All right, let's move to first base. Should we rotate who starts, or Matt, do you want to start?
I don't mind starting.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm hesitant to say this because I want Doug to overpay for him, and I also want Beer is Good Food to overpay for him because Ken is like asking everything for him. It is Bellinger. He's ADP at 63. He hasn't proven himself as a consistent hitter each year. I'm not willing to invest in that at first base. He did give us 20 steals last year. Batting average was a high for him. His power increased again, but are we going to see that again? He's just so inconsistent with his play. You know, he's been under 200 at certain points in his career. So I just don't see him at a bargain price. I think people are overpaying for him there. There's first basemen that could offer more power, more consistent average, more consistent OPS at a cheaper price. They may not offer steals, but I think you get steals from other positions. My underrated would be Rhys Hoskins. Who knows where he's going to sign, but his ADP is at 200 right now. Talk about consistency from first base, always over 800. He's gone over 900 at other times. Been very consistent with power, consistent with OPS, OBP. So Hoskins there is a deal at 200. He's going to sign somewhere, and his ADP is going to shoot up. I would even consider him in a dynasty league because you're going to have a good 4 years from him. My favorite is Pasquatch. Vinny, I'm glad I was able to reacquire him this year. I had to give up Harper for that, but any big Italian guy that goes and talks to his mom between at bats in the stands is just wins my heart. So yeah, so I'm cheering for Vinny. He's great. He has everything that we expect. I want to see see if his shoulder is healed. I think he gets kind of a bad rap for last year. His shoulder was killing him last year. Besides last year, he's had great discipline along with great EVs. And I'd like to see that EV come back this year with that plate discipline.
He's a fun one for sure. Overrated for me is Yandy Diaz. I know he hit 330. I know his OPS was 932. I know he had 22 home runs, but he's never hit more than 14 home runs in a season before this season. He had never had more than 71 runs. He had never had more than 64 RBIs. He is a contact machine. We know that, but he hits the ball on the ground. And we saw his power kind of go up and down last season, and his ability to lift wasn't consistent. And so I think there are a lot of those players who there's a point where once their ADP goes past that point, I can't touch them because like Bellinger, like some others, they don't have the track record, right? And the reverse of that would be a Hoskins who is good for 25 to 30 home runs darn near every year. You know what you're getting, lower average, right? Big power. I'd rather have something that's predictable than bet on a Diaz to continue to hit 20 plus home runs or Bellinger to do what he did. My underrated is Vladimir Guerrero. I think we have stopped talking about him, and we talk about him as if he struggled last season. And the sub 800 OPS is a little strange to see. And he did have a ton of plate appearances, but I think all of the plate skills that he's displayed previously are still there, right? It's the zone contact ability, the big power, the lower swinging strike for as hard as he swings. I still think he's one of the probably top 5 talented hitters in the league. And in a down year, when he hit the ball on the ground a bunch, he still had 26 home runs. He's also going to hit in the middle of that lineup. So Vladdy is my underrated. And then my personal favorite, who I have to admit, when I was doing this research, I saw his numbers and I said, holy shit, this guy really did this. And would consider trading Freddie Freeman for him and something small. Tristan Casas. I was stunned. I knew he was good. I knew he really put it together in the second half. But to see the 14% walk rate, 24 home runs, 23 years old, right? 25% K rate I don't love, but I think that gets better over time. He doesn't hit a ton of ground balls. I see 35 home run power in that bat with the ability to get on base. And I don't think his average is going to drag as much as people would expect from a 35 home run hitter. To me, he's the next great first baseman in many ways. I don't think he's Freddie Freeman, but I think that he has a ton of ability, and I was shocked to see the stats that he put up last year, specifically in the second half. So Casas is my favorite first baseman as of right now. Why don't we take a
Was
quick?
that a trade offer? Because
I think it was. It totally was.
I'm courting him, right? We're having drinks. We might go have a little bite to eat. Me and Smurf might need to have a little conversation offline. It might not be about Casas. It might be about Casas. We might just be catching up. We haven't talked in a minute, right? We might talk fantasy football successes. Like, it could be anything, right? But you gotta slide in a little bit somewhere. Check your DMs later on, Doug. We'll see what happens.
My God, the courting has begun. I love it. I love it. I love the attention, man. This is great.
Why don't we take a quick break and we will come back with Doug and Aaron's first baseman.
All right.